Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Okay. So today we are going to start one of the important concept, right? If you are going to develop any kind of a real-time application, right? Without a database, we cannot say that it's a web application. We can say it's a web page. Web page means without any kind of database activities, you can also develop one application, right? For that, you do not need C# language, right? For that, you do not need any databases. For that, HTML, CSS, JavaScript is enough. But that is nothing but a web application. We can say that's a website, right? Or we can say web pages, right? But if you want to develop any web application, right? Any real kind of activity you want to perform. So basically, why we are going to develop application to process the data, right? And where we are going to store the data permanently. Permanently storing the data means database is there, right? Main objective is the data, and we want to store the data in the database. But as a normal user who cannot, a normal user cannot do all the database activities, right? For that, we are just providing one interface. The user will interact with the interface, and behind the interface, as a developer, we have written the code, right? Which will going to interact with the database, right? So basically, until and unless you are not implementing any kind of a database in your application, you cannot say it's a real kind of application, right? Any application you take into consideration, that application definitely are having database, right? So today we are going to start discussing ADO.NET, right? Once ADO.NET is completed, then we will start discussing the entity framework, right? And once entity framework is completed, then we will cover LinQ and parallel LinQ. Because LinQ is basically depend upon the entity framework. So until and unless you are not understanding entity framework, it is difficult for you to understand the LinQs. And until and unless you did not understand that LinQ concept, it will be very difficult for you to understand parallel LinQ. So accordingly, I'm going in the same manner, right? So first we will discuss ADO.NET, then we will discuss LinQ, and after ADO.NET, we will discuss entity framework. After entity framework, we will discuss LinQ and PLinQ. So
so that we have file handling, right? File handling, auto mapper, reflection.
Sorry, yeah, everything I'm going to cover, right? Don't worry, auto mapper, reflection, everything is there as part of the syllabus. But first of all, which are required, which are mandatory, right? Those things I'm covering: auto mapper, reflection, right? .NET framework architecture, optional parameter, working with the XML and JSON, right? Everything, working with the files, everything I'm going to cover. Don't worry.
Okay, so thank you.
Yeah. So can anybody tell me what is ADO.NET? I'm just saying the next 4 topics what I'm going to cover. Today I'm going to start ADO, then I will start entity framework, then I will start your LinQ and PLinQ. Once these things completed, then we will start again automapper, reflection, file handling, optional parameter, all these things, right? And once these things are completed, then we will start discussing the design patterns and design principles, right? So we have solid design pattern. We have some 23 gang of 4 design, solid design principles. We are having 23 gang of 4 design patterns, right? So everything we are going to discuss. So, but what basically I'm planning to take the design patterns, right? The design patterns in the weekend, right? So because the design patterns are very important, and I don't want anyone to miss the class for that purpose, and it's not going to be a 1 hour, 2 hour session. I'm planning to take the design patterns by taking 3 hour sessions per day, right? And that will be good if I'm taking the classes on weekend, right? So let's see what happens. But for now, let's keep focus on this ADO.NET. What is ADO, right? Before learning ADO.NET, first we need to understand what is ADO. ADO stands for ActiveX Data Objects, right? This is the full form, right? I don't know what is a ActiveX data object, but for me, right, if you want to interact with the database, right, then you need to use ADO.NET, right? See, ADO.NET is one of the Microsoft data access technology, right? So it is one of the data access technology. What it means? It means apart from ADO.NET, we are having other data access technologies like LNQ to SQL, like entity framework, right? Those we can also use to interact with the database. So it is one of the data access technology which will be provided by Microsoft Corporation, and using this ADO.NET technology, we can communicate with different data sources, right? So here I'm not specifying I'm going to communicate with a SQL Server. I'm not mentioning that I'm going to communicate with a MySQL database. Rather, I'm mentioning here I'm going to communicate with different data sources, right? It is a part of a .NET framework which is used to establish a connection between the .NET application, right? So if you want to make a connection, right? So suppose from your .NET application, you want to communicate with the database. First of all, you need to make a connection between your .NET application and the data sources, right? Once you make the connection, then only you can perform the CRUD operations, right? So this is the technology, right, which is provided by Microsoft, which is basically used to establish a connection between your .NET application and the data sources. So what are the data sources? Yes, the data sources might be your SQL Server, might be your Oracle, might be your MySQL, might be your XML document. So right, you can use XML document as a data source. You can use MySQL as a data source. You can use Oracle as a data source. You can use SQL Server as a data source. Even though you can also use MS Access, MS Excel as data sources also, right? So you can also use MS Access, MS Excel, Microsoft Access, Microsoft Excel as a data sources. So data sources not only the SQL Server database or not only the Oracle MySQL Server database. It might be your Access, MS Access. It might be your MS Excel. It might be your XML, right? So basically different data sources we have where we can store our data. And this .NET technology, right, which is provided by Microsoft, that is called ADO.NET, is going to communicate with all those data sources and then going to perform different kind of operations. So what are the operations we can perform using data ADO.NET? Yes, you can retrieve the, first of all, you need to make the connection to the database, right? Once you may establish the connection, then you can retrieve the data, right? You can insert the data, you can update the data, you can delete the data. So these four operations you can perform over the database or over the data sources, right? And these four operations commonly called as a CRUD operation, right? And ADO.NET, see, basically, if you want to use ADO.NET for ADO.NET related activities, right? It is a part of a .NET framework. That means what now? Whenever we install .NET framework, right? Two things are get installed. One is BCL, base class library, right? Another one is CLR. BCL means it is going to contain the predefined classes and methods as part of assemblies, right? So for ADO.NET, mainly two assemblies are get installed. One is System.Data and another one is System.Xml, right? So whenever you want to interact with the XML, you have to include this DLL. And if you want to interact with the SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, MS Access, MS Excel, then you have to use System.Data. So first of all, ADO.NET is one of the Microsoft technology, or you can say data access technology, which is basically used to communicate with the data sources. Data sources in the sense it is not only database, but also other things. What are the data sources we can use to communicate? One is SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, XML, MS Access, MS Excel, etc. Right? And this .NET framework, right? .NET framework. So this ADO.NET is a part of a .NET framework, and this .NET ADO.NET technology basically used to establish a communication between the .NET application and the different data sources, right? Once we establish the connection between the data sources from our .NET application, then we can perform the CRUD operation. What do you mean by CRUD operation? Retrieving the data, select query. insert query, update query, and delete query, right? So insert, update, delete, select, right? All the four operations you can perform over the database, right? Again, by using a simple SQL statement, you can perform the operation. Also, you can write storage procedure, right? And you can do the operations. Both of the options we are going to see practically. And whenever you are going to use ADO.NET, if you are interacting with the databases, right, then you have to include this namespace. And if you are using XML as your data source, then you have to use this DLL. Is that clear? What is ADO.NET?
Yes.
Right? So now ADO.NET means whenever you want to interact with the data source, then from what type of applications, right, you can communicate with the database, right? Any .NET application, right? Whether it is a ASP.NET web form application, Windows form application, right? MVC application, console application, web API application, or even if you are developing .NET Core application, right? WPF, right? Any kind of applications, WPF, WCF, right? So let me add this also, WPF, WCF, right, etc. So any kind of .NET application you take into consideration, right? If you want to interact with the database or data sources, then you can use ADO.NET. So ADO.NET can be used with all the .NET applications like this. Clear? Guys?
It's clear. Thank you.
Right. So basically, now before understanding ADO.NET, we need to understand what are the different components, right? So component basically, there are two components. One is data provider and another one is data set, right? Data provider, this is basically whenever you are interacting with a connected oriented architecture. So basically there are two architectures, right? If you remember connected oriented architecture, and this is disconnected architecture, right? Connected, and this is disconnected, right? So disconnected, connected, everything we are going to discuss in detail, right? Right. See, so basically, whenever you are going to interact with the database, right, you have to use this component. One is data provider. Data provider means it is specific to database, and data set, it is not specific to any database, right? That means this is working completely on your application, right? On your .NET application. For this, you do not require an active or open connection with the database. And data provider means they are specific to database, right? Right, and they require an open connection. This is the reason why it is saying connected oriented, means what, that there should be one active and open connection in order to work with this. And data set means this, for this an active and open connection is not required. It is completely based on your .NET application. We'll see this thing practically. Data set means it's an independent class, and data provider means this is nothing but these classes. Connection, command, data reader, data adapter, these are nothing but one classes, and these classes are part of your data provider. Data set, data view, right? They are completely different, right? They are part of this data set, right? We'll see all these things in detail, right? So basically, components of a .NET means there are two components. One is data provider. We'll discuss what is data provider, what are the data provider, why we need data provider, everything we will discuss. And second one is data set. What is data set, right? That is also we are going to discuss. So mainly ADO.NET has two components for accessing and manipulating the data over in the data source, right? And they are data provider and data set, right? Data provider means if you are going to work with the connected oriented architecture, and data set means disconnected. We'll see what is connection oriented, right? What is disconnect oriented architecture. Everything we are going to discuss in detail. Right. Now, let us discuss step by step. What are .NET data provider? See, suppose I'm writing some code, right? In my .NET application, I'm writing some code. So these code are C# code or SQL code. In any statement you written in your .NET application, these are your SQL statement or C# statement.
C#.
If you take this C# statement and directly run into your run under the SQL Server database, is it going to work?
No.
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 Why? Because
Because-
SQL understand only database understand only SQL statement, and here we are writing the statement in C# language. C# language and SQL language, both are same or both are two different things?
Two different things.
That means, but we cannot write a C# statement in SQL Server, right? And even we cannot write SQL statement in our C# application, right? So if we want to make a communication between them, right, then we need some mechanism, and that mechanism here is ADO.NET, and ADO.NET provide two components. One is data provider, another is data set. So the data provider, right, which is a part of a .NET framework, or you can say ADO.NET, right, take the responsibility, right? Take the responsibility to execute our C# code under the database, right? So how it is going to do this, right? See, so first of all, let me tell you, if you want to execute some code under the database from your .NET application, first of all, you need to make a communication, or you need to establish a communication between the database and your .NET application. You need to connect with your database, right? Once you establish the communication link, right, then you can prepare your SQL statement, right? Then you need to execute the SQL command, right? And once you execute the SQL command, then you need to retrieve the result and display it on the application, right? So simply, right? If you want to communicate with SQL Server database, right, then what are the steps, right? Without establishing the communication, so can I execute the data? Because the C#.NET application doesn't know on which database, on which server, on which database table, right, I'm going to perform the operation. That means we need to make a relationship, not relationship, establish a communication, right? So first of all, stop .NET application, right? From .NET application to SQL, we need the communication, right? First, communication is required. So once we establish the communication, right, then second step, what is second step? You need to prepare the SQL command, because what exactly you want to execute on the database, guys? Suppose from my .NET application, I establish the communication with the database, right? Then once I establish the communication link, right, now my application can communicate with the database. Then what are the things, what is the main objective of a communication? You want to execute some SQL command or anything else?
SQL command.
SQL command, right? That means second step, you need to prepare the SQL command. So once you prepare the SQL command, then in the step 3, what you need to do? You need to execute the SQL command, right? You need to execute the SQL command, right? Once you execute the SQL command, right? Suppose I execute one select statement, then what the result of that select query, right? The database is going to return some data. Yes or no?
Yes.
So the
Yes.
step 4 is handle the result, right? How you are going to handle that is also important. So what? So if you are communicating with one database, then first of all you need to know how to make the establish, how to communicate with the database. Once you communicate with the database, you need to prepare the SQL command. Then you need to execute the SQL command, and you need to handle the result. How we are going to do this and how this is possible in our, and guys, remember these 4 things what I'm showing here, these 4 things are going to be done inside your .NET application only, right? And this is possible because of a .NET data provider. Understand what is the use of a .NET data provider? .NET data provider provide us some predefined classes Using those classes, we can communicate with the database. We can prepare the SQL command. We can execute the SQL command. We can retrieve the data, and whatever operation you want to do with the data, you can do in your application. And this is possible by using .NET data providers. Clear?
Yes, clear.
Yes.
Right now. Now, suppose again we will discuss this thing detail. Right, for now, I'm just showing you some demo code. Right, don't go with the code. Everything I'm going to discuss in detail. But for now, suppose from your Edio.NET code, right, from your .NET application, you want to communicate with SQL Server, right? Then what is the process? What are the things you need to use, right? So here you can see, first of all, what you need to do, you need a connection, right? You need SQL connection, right? So for connection, you need to establish the connection between your .NET application and SQL, or you can say between the .NET application and your database, right? And if you can see, first of all, I need a connection. For that, this .NET provider, right? What I'm using here, SqlConnection, right? So you can see I'm using one class called SqlConnection. By using SqlConnection, I'm communicating with the database. Once you have the SqlConnection, right, for this active, where is that? Where is step 2? Prepare the command, right? So this is command on. For preparing the command, right, the .NET data provider provide one class called SqlCommand. Right, you can see SQL command. Using this SQL command, I'm writing some code, right? Select star from customer. I'm providing the connection object. So this basically, this select statement is going to execute on this connection, right? This connection means what is the data source, what is the database table, or what are the security mechanism, how you are logging into the database, everything you are providing, right? And then, right, once you prepare the SQL command, then you need to execute the SQL command, right? For execution purpose, you can see I'm using SQL data reader, right? And using SQL data reader, I'm executing the command, right? And once you execute the command, then you need to handle the result, right? For handling result, here I'm using the read method to read the result one by one. What is this method is written? That means this is the generic syntax, you can say, to communicate with the SQL Server database. Further, if you notice, right? Further, if you notice, all the predefined classes, right, are prefixed with what name? SQL, SQL connection, SQL command, SQL data reader. See, if you are prefixing this connection class, command class, data reader class with SQL, right? That means these classes are responsible for communicating with the SQL Server database only, right? For communicating with the SQL Server databases only. Now you might be one question, sir, how I can communicate with the Oracle database? Yes. So instead of a SQL connection, if you want to communicate with Oracle database, then you need to use Oracle connection. You need to use Oracle command. You need to use Oracle data reader, right? That means from the class itself, it is specifying it is going to communicate with which database, right? So, and all these classes, right? You can see for this particular example, SqlConnection, SQL command, SQL data reader, all these classes are present inside System.SQL client namespace. So System.Data.SQL client namespace. So we can say that .NET data provider for SQL Server database is this one. Clear? So this .NET data provider, right? .NET data provider for SQL Server database is System.Data.SQL client. This namespace or this DLL, right, provide lots of predefined classes. Using those predefined classes, we can communicate with the database. We can prepare the SQL command, which is going to execute on the SQL Server database. We can use we can also handle the result. We can also execute the command, right? Everything we can do by using the classes which are defined inside this namespace, right? So basically, if you want to communicate with SQL Server database, first of all, you need to include this namespace on your application. Clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes.
Similarly, if you want to communicate with Oracle, then what is required? Oracle connection, Oracle command, right? Oracle data reader, right? Rest of the thing is same. That means here you can see specifically we are mentioning the classes with prefixed with Oracle keyword. So means it is going to communicate with the Oracle database, and the provider for Oracle database is System.Data.Oracle client. Previously, it is System.Data.SQL client is the .NET data provider to communicate with SQL database, and the .NET data provider to communicate with the Oracle database is System.Data.Oracle client. Right now, suppose you want to communicate with MS Access, right? MS Excel, MS Access, right? Then for that you can use OLEDB connection, right? Some OLEDB connection, OLEDB command, OLEDB data reader classes, right? So the .NET data provider for OLEDB mean other databases, right? Apart from SQL and apart from SQL Server and Oracle, if you want to communicate with other databases, right, like MySQL, MS Access, MS Excel, right, then in that case you need to use OLEDB provider, right? And the provider for this is System.Data.OLEDB. So now you have a different kind of a .NET data provider. You can see the SQL Server data provider is this one. Oracle data provider is System.Data.Oracle client. OLEDB data provider is OLEDB, and ODBC data provider is ODBC. So ODBC is not used, but yes, initially when they developed, they introduced ODBC, but but nowadays this ODBC is not used. So mostly we are going to use these three, right? So if you are communicating with the SQL Server, you have to use this data provider. If you are communicating with Oracle, you have to use this, and for other databases you can use this one. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now
But
we
what
yeah.
what was the ODBC like? It is a kind of database, like same as SQL Server.
No. See, what I'm saying that initially when the .NET framework introduced, right, at that time to communicate with the database, they have used ODBCs, right?
Okay.
So instead of using SQL client to connect to the SQL Server, you can still use ODBC, right? If you remember the Java application, right? In Java there is something called JDBC, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
for that purpose, they introduced initially this as ODBC, but later that is, you can say it's a legacy, right? Currently, we are using this SQL client and Oracle client and OLEDB. This is nowadays not used,
Okay.
but it's like an old database you can consider, right? So to give you a better idea, what I can say, your .NET application, it can be console application, it can be Windows application, it can be web application. If they want to communicate with the database, they might be communicate with the SQL Server, Oracle, OLEDB, ODBC, anything, right? ODBC means old database, legacy database, right? So they cannot directly communicate. For that, what they need some .NET data provider, right? Now, if you want to communicate with SQL Server, then you have to use SQL client, this .NET data provider. If you want to communicate with Oracle, then you have to use Oracle client, right? And this .NET data provider internally providing some classes, connection, command, data reader, data adapter. I have put this four inside one block, and I have put dataset inside another block. The reason for this is, if you are communicating with the SQL client, the class name is going to be SqlConnection, SqlCommand, SQL data reader, SQL data adapter. If I am communicating with the Oracle database, then I have to use this Oracle client, .NET provider, and for that purpose, the classes that are going to be used is Oracle connection, Oracle command, Oracle data reader, and Oracle data adapter. And the dataset, don't think that there is SQL dataset, there is Oracle dataset. Dataset is independent. no matter whatever provider you use, you might be use SQL client, Oracle client, dataset is going to be same. So there is no prefix that you can apply to datasets such as SQL and Oracle. So these four things, what I'm showing here, these are going to be work in connection oriented architecture, and this is going to be work in disconnected oriented architecture. Connection oriented architecture means what? Now an active and open connection is required to work on this thing. And for this, an active and open connection is not required, right? So you can see the different classes for connection. You can have a SQL connection, Oracle connection, right? OLEDB connection, ODBC, command data reader, right? Data adapter, right? For each these classes, based on your provider, the required prefix you need to add or append. But for data set, this is not specific to your, provider. This is not specific to provider. Dataset object in ADO.NET is not provider specific. Once you connect to a database, execute the command, retrieve the data into the .NET application, the data then can be stored inside a dataset and work independently of the database. Now, once you connect the database, once you execute the command and once you retrieve the data, right, then you can store the data in the dataset, and on the dataset, whatever operation you can do, you want to do, you can do, right? And for that, an active and open connection is not required, right? You can close the connection, that is fine, right? And this is the reason why it is not specific to any provider, right? As it is not specific to any provider, so they do not prefix the word SQL, Oracle, OLEDB, anything like this before the dataset name. So what is this dataset? Dataset, you can consider it is a collection of more than one table, right? So what is database? Database is a collection of a table. Similarly, what is dataset? Dataset is also a collection of one or more data tables. So we'll discuss what is data table, what is data view, what is dataset, right? What are all these connection classes? Each of these we will discuss one by one. Clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so what I'm planning to do is, first of all, I will show you the examples, right? How to communicate with SQL Server database, right? And then I'm going to explain you the things in detail, right? So for this, course, we are going to interact with the SQL Server database. And I hope you guys have installed SQL Server on your machine. Is there anyone who still not yet installed SQL Server? All installed now?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. So if you installed SQL Server database, then you might know SQL Server is a different one and SSMS is a different one. Don't think that SSMS is the database, right? So SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, it is basically a client tool to interact with the database. Database is somewhere, right? And this is the tool that you can use to communicate with the database, right? So let me show you. So let us do one thing. First of all, create one database, right, by using SQL Server, and then I will show you how to communicate with that database and how you can perform the all the operations, right? Let me open SQL Server Management Studio. First of all, you need to make sure, right, your services are running, right? So services should be running. So if you open the services tab, right, then you will see something called MS SQL. Microsoft SQL Server. Where is Microsoft SQL Server?
It's
It's
SQL
SQL Server.
Yeah. So you can see in my machine, I have installed two different SQL server. One is SQL Express. Another name I have provided is SQL Server tab, right? So two different version I have installed. That's why you can see one is SQL Server Express, another one is SQL Server tab, right? So you can I can communicate with both of these. So first of all, you need to make sure this should be running, right? So if not running, so sometimes it will be in stop state, right? If it is in stop state, then you cannot communicate with the database, right? Now, if I'm opening this one, right, I'm trying to opening and trying to communicate with this SQL Express, right? So in that case, you will see I'm unable to communicate. So sometimes why I'm showing this now, people are trying to communicate with the database and sometimes they are getting some error, right? So in this case, this is nothing but my computer name and this is my database name. So you can see SQL Express, right? And I'm trying to communicate. So in this case, I cannot communicate. Why I cannot communicate? Because this database server is not running. Database is not running. Database is down, right? Once database is down, then by using your tool, this is nothing but this is not your database, right? This is just a tool. So using this tool, you cannot communicate with the database. See, after sometimes you will get one error that is unable to communicate or establish the connection, some kind of this, right? Let see, cannot connect to this database. A network related or instance specific error occurred, right? Sometimes you might get this error and this error because your database is not running, right? Now, I'm having another database SQL Server tab. This is running, right? You can see that database SQL Server, where is that? This one, this server is running, right? Now, if I click on this connect button, I can communicate. I can connect to the database, right? So any database you can use, right? I'm going to use the SQL Express. So for that purpose, I need to start this one. So right click and click on the start button, right? Once you click on the start button, then just refresh this one. You can see this refresh button, right? Just click on this refresh button. Now you can see your database server is running, right? Once the database server is running, then only you can communicate with the database. How to communicate? Just type SSMS or SQL Server Management Studio. Click on this OK button, right? Click on the OK button. Right? So then you have to select the database which you want to communicate. If not provided, then you have to type this one, right? You have to provide your computer name. How you will get your computer name? Go to my computer, right? Go to properties. So this is nothing but your computer name. So you can see laptop hyphen whatever name it's showing, and then you have to provide the this is my computer name slash, then this is nothing but your database server. What is the server name? I have already shown that is SQL Express one, and another one is SQL Server name, right? So you have to provide the server name, right? So in this case, the server name is nothing but my machine name provided by the database name. Sometimes what you will do, right? In this case, I cannot use dot operator. People, you can see some website they're saying that you can also use dot operator to connect, but in this case, I cannot use, because if I use the dot operator, then it will get only confused to communicate with SQL Express or SQL Server tab, which because two instances is running on my machine. If one instance, then you can try dot, but if multiple instances, you cannot try write that dot. A dot operator. So in this case, I'm providing my machine address, and then I'm providing the SQL Server Express, that is the server name. Other option is there, the IP address, right? Suppose your database server is hosting in some server, then that server IP address you can also provide here, right? So this is nothing but your server name that can be dot if you are installing the SQL Server in your local machine and only one instance is there. And if multiple instance, then you cannot use, right? And then you can provide the computer name provided by your server name. And I generally prefer this approach because I am installing multiple instances. And the third approach is that the IP address, wherever your database is installed, right? Wherever the database is running, that server IP address, if you want, you can put also here. So database engine here, you can see I'm going with the database only, right? I'm not going to perform that SSIS, SSRS, SSAS, right? If anybody having any experience into MSBI, then they might be no, right? So if you are going for MSBI, then you have to choose other options, right? But I'm not going with the MSBI. I'm going to interact with the database for that and to perform the CRUD operation. So for that purpose, I'm selecting the database engine. The authentication here, you can go with SQL Server authentication. For SQL Server, you need to provide the login ID and password. And I forgot what is my login and ID and password, right? So I generally used my Windows authentication, right? And I will show you how to create the username and password, right? Windows authentication, I'm selecting, right? So basically, if you see while I'm selecting the SQL authentication, you can see this login and password text box are enabled, right? And once I select the Windows authentication, these two are disabled. What it means? It means now if you are selecting the Windows authentication, then you can see by default, it is taking this name, laptop/Pranay. Pranay means this is the admin. So admin credential will be used in this case. So who is the, instead of saying admin credential, it is better to share the Windows credential. Windows credential means what is the username using which you are logging into this machine, that username is going to be taken, right? And you can say I'm logging into this machine by using the username Pranay, right? So that is what it is taking by default, right? So Windows authentication, and once you provide this thing, you need to click on the connect button, right? So once you click on the connect button, right? So there is something called right? So you can see there is something called login, right? And if you want to create a new login, right? So for that login name, right? So what I'm providing here, I'm providing here PKR, password I'm providing 123456, right? And here I'm clicking on the OK button. Oh, sorry. Login name I'm providing here PKR, and I'm providing the password 123456, 123456, and click on the OK button, right? So now you can see one user is created with the credential PKR, right? Now I want to connect with the using SQL authentication. For that, what you need to do, you need to use SQL. You need to provide the username PKR, password is 123456, and click on the connect button. Login failed. Why it is failed?
Security roles has been assigned to it. Right? Sometimes what happens, I need to restart my machine to make this to work. Let me try another instance and let me try with the SQL authentication. Right? PKR, password is 123456. No process. No process is okay. Already one connection is established. That's why I'm getting this error.
So go to configuration settings of SQL Server and enable TCP/IP and that one.
No, I don't think so. I think now it should work. Connection established, but then an error occurred during the process. Sorry, what is the option?
No. In the start menu, can you go to the configuration settings of SQL Server? Start menu. Can you type configuration settings?
Okay. Don't waste our time by doing this thing. So let me do one thing. Let me log in with Windows credential. I will show you this thing later, right? We are not going to learn SQL Server here. We are just going to use the SQL Server database. We are keep focusing on ADO.NET, right? Let me communicate with SSMS, right? Okay, let me communicate with Windows authentication, right? So we have connected to the database, and let me remove this thing. So whatever database is already there, right? And let me create a new database, right? So once you communicate with the database, then just right click on this database, click on the new database, and here you have to provide the database name, student.db. I'm providing the database name as student.db, and then I'm clicking on the OK button, right? So once you click on the OK button, then you can see student.db is there. If not showing, then click on the refresh button, right? Student.db database is created, right? So this database is created with some system tables, right? But in this case, you will not find anything. Once you create our table, this table will become inside here. But I'm not going to create the table by using SQL Server. I'm going to show you how to create a table by using SS from our .NET application, right? First of all, you need to communicate with the SSMS, right? Then you need to create a database table, right? So once you create the table, right, then what is our database part is over. Now we need to write the code to communicate with the database, right? And to do all these things, right? I'm not going to explain. And for that purpose, what is required, you need to create one application, right? Right. So any version of Visual Studio you can use. I'm going with the latest one, Visual Studio 2022, creating a new project. Right, search for console. Right, so I'm providing the application as ADO demo. I'm selecting the target framework latest 4.8, click on the create button. Right, so once you create one application, right, then you need to do few things, right? I'm not explaining the code right now. I will explain everything in detail, right? For now, what I can show you is, right? For now, what I can show you is, so I'm creating one main method, and from this main method, I'm calling this create table method, right? So directly I'm creating the instance and calling the method. If you are not understanding this thing, then you can also understand these things, right? Right, if you do not understand this thing, then you can understand this thing, right? Creating an instance of object class and calling this create table method, right? So what is my objective of this code? So from this code, I want to do something. So what is the thing? First of all, I need to make a connection with the database, right? For that purpose, what authentication I'm using? I'm using Windows authentication. For Windows authentication, you have to use SSPI, integrated security as SSPI, or integrated security as true. Both of these options are going to work, right? If you are using Windows authentication to communicate with the database, then you have to provide integrated security, which value might be SSPI or true. Then the data source is nothing but where your database server is. So in my case, it is located, my database server address is this one. So my laptop name, machine name / SQL Express. That is what I'm specifying here, right? And then I want to communicate with which DB. So if you remember, I have created one student DB. I want to communicate with that, so that I have specified here. So data source is nothing but the location where your server is. Database means on which database you want to communicate. And this one is specifying I'm communicating with the using Windows authentication. If it is not Windows authentication, SQL Server authentication, then in that case, instead of using this one, you have to specify username and user ID equals to what is the ID, and the password is what is the password to communicate, right? Those 4 things you need to specify. Then once the connection and how I'm creating this by using the SqlConnection class. So why I'm using SqlConnection? Why anybody can tell me?
Because we are communicating with SQL Server.
And what is the provider for this? System.Data.SQL client. Is that clear?
Yes.
Right. First of all, you need to include this one. See, what is this SqlConnection class, SqlCommand class, everything I'm going to discuss. For now, I'm just saying this SqlConnection class is basically used to make the established, right? So to this class constructor, guys, while I'm explaining, please mute yourself. While I'm asking the question, at that time you can unmute and again mute, right? So in this case, you can see I'm creating one SqlConnection object, and to the constructor, what I'm passing this thing, right? If you are not interested with this approach, right, other option is also there. That is what we are going to discuss in our next in the next chapter, right? So for now, this is the SqlConnection class. To this class, I'm providing the connection string, you can say. You can consider this is nothing but your connection string. The connection string will specify the information about the data source, the database, and the authentication things, right? And why I'm using this @ symbol, because if I'm removing this @ symbol here, then it will give me one error. So instead of using // here, you can use // here. But instead of this, the better idea is to use @ symbol at the beginning, right? And once your connection is established, then second thing is what you need to prepare the command. So once your connection is established, then what is the second thing? Prepare the command, right? And for preparing the command, what class we are going to use?
SqlCommand.
SqlCommand. So within this SqlCommand class, I'm providing the create table student, right? I'm creating the table student ID integer not null, name varchar 100, email varchar 50, join date. And second parameter is nothing but the connection object, right? So connection object, what it means, that it means this statement, right? Whatever SQL statement I have written, right? Those statement is going to execute on this connection. And this connection object already specify what is the IP address or machine name or the server address, what is the database name, and what authentication it should use to execute this statement. So now this statement, right, what SQL statement I have written here, this statement is going to be executed on this database under this server. Clear?
Yes.
Do I need to explain this, Corey?
No, sir. Thank you.
So this is a simple this is just simple create table statement. Create table name. This is the column name, data type. I'm making this as not null. Column name, I'm making the data type as varchar 100. Email varchar. So okay, so let me give some meaningful. So let me. This is ID. This is name. This is email, right? And this is join date, right? So proper column name should be there, right? So once you execute the, and here case sensitive is not matter, right? You know, you can write the statement in SQL either using lowercase, uppercase, that doesn't matter at all, right? So once you prepare the command object, right? But in this case, the statement is not going to be executed here, right? See, you have provided the connection string. You have prepared the you prepare the command, right, that you want to execute. But after then, you need to establish the connection. Here, you are just creating the connection object, but you are not establishing the connection. When the connection will establish when you call this open method on the connection object, right? And similarly, when you call the close method on the connection object, the connection is going to be closed. So here you are just creating the connection object, and here you are opening the connection. So once you call the open method, it will make it will connect it to the database. The .NET application is now connected to the database, and once it is connected, then you can execute the command, right? And how you are going to execute this CM command class provide one method execute non-query, right? Apart from this execute non-query, other methods are also available, right? Execute scalar, right? So many methods are available. Those we are going to discuss once we discuss the command object, right? And once we execute this command, then we have to provide this message that a table created successfully, right? And once we provide this message, table created successfully, right? And while either opening the connection, while either executing this command, if some exception occurred, then this catch block is there to handle the exception, because this is the parent class, super class, right? Exception is the super class of all .NET exception classes. So any type of exception thrown from the corresponding try block, that is going to be catched by this catch block, right? And finally, what is mandatory? Finally, you have to close this connection, right? So, but this is wrong, right? Because in this case, what you need to write, if connection is not equals to null, then only you have to close the connection. Clear? Guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Clear.
Right. So now what will happen if everything is fine, then a table should be created inside the student DB database inside this server, right? Clear? Let me run the application.
Online.
I'll come to your point. Let me run the application.
No, on line number just 22, there is a wrong that column name. So
Line number 22.
yes, if you go at the end in line number 22,
22. What is wrong?
just the column name, just the first join date.
Okay, it's fine. So
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. So it's a shape. I mean, this will not cause any harm, right, to your application. So column
Yes.
name is going to be different, right? So in this case, you can see table created successfully. That means our execution, the connection is established, the command is executed on the database, right? Now let us verify. Now refresh the student DB and just expand this table folder, and you will see the student is created. The table student is created, right? So now if I'm providing this to, and instead of int, I'm providing this INTT. So in this case, the syntax is wrong. Yes or no?
Yes.
So if the syntax is wrong, then this statement is not going to be executed on the database. Even the connection string is correct, everything is correct, right? This statement is not going to be executed on the database, right? In that case, it will throw one exception, right? When it is going to throw the exception, can anybody tell me at line number what?
Execute non-copy.
Exactly.
28.
This is the line number where it is going to throw the exception. Why? Because in this case, we are just creating the connection object, right? Connection is not established. In this case, we are just preparing the SQL statement. The statement is not executed. In this case, if there is issue with your connection string, right, then this statement will throw exception. If there is no issue, then connection will be established. And in this statement, when I'm calling this execute non-query method, at that time only this statement is going to be executed on this connection object, right? And at that time only it is going to throw me the exception. Let me run the application. Right? Something went wrong, and this column parameter variable, right? you can see cannot find data type INTT. Clear?
Yes.
My screen is visible.
Yes.
So
Yes.
cannot find data type INTT, right? So this is the thing, right? Now what I'm trying to do, I'm making this one, right? And SQL Express to I'm providing now. Now what at what line number it is going to throw me the exception?
Connection dot open.
Line number 10.
25.
25.
Exactly. And what type of error? A network specific instance of what is that that error you will get, right? Right. So it is going to wait for some time, and then it will be provided a network related or instance specific error while establishing a connection to the SQL server. The server was not found or was not accessible, right? So what it means, now it is trying to communicate or trying to connect with this server, but the server was not found or the server was not accessible. In this case, there is no server with this name. This is the reason why it is showing me the error, right? Clear?
Yes.
Right? Even though if I'm providing this one, right, and if I make the SQL server to down, right, then if I'm running this application, then again I'm going to get the same error, right? So it might be so in that case also he is unable to find the server because the server is down, right? So you will get the same error. Clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now, suppose you want to insert one record, right? Then how you will do this, right? Let me show you this thing, right? So database name is, what is the database name? Student.db. So we have created the database Student.db. We have created the student table, ID, name, email, join date, and I'm inserting some values, right? This is the simple insert statement. Insert into column name, values, and then you have to provide the values that you want to insert, right? And where this command is going to execute on this connection, right? And then you have to open the connection, execute the query, and then you will print this thing, right? Any question from this example? Guys,
No.
what is the column name we have created? I, na?
Yeah.
Okay, because let me. So instead of I, let me make this as join date, right? Because join date, right? And let me change this one here, join date. Fine.
But here, the first letter of all the columns are not capital, so that is fine.
Yeah, that is fine. It's not case sensitive, right? SQL statement is not case sensitive, right? So this statement, it is going to be executed on the database, so database can manage this, right? So in this case, if everything is fine, the statement will be executed. If some error occurs, then this catch block is going to execute. Instead of printing the full message, let me print the message. Okay, right? Now let me run the. Sorry,
The column for the email is wrong.
which one?
Email in the database, the column is wrong. The name.
No, I don't think no. Oh, it is email. Okay. Right. So ID, name, email, join date. Now it's fine.
Yes.
Guys.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, let me cross verify ID, name, email, join date, fine. Then I'm opening the connection, executing the SQL command, and then I'm printing this statement. If any error, catch block will execute, and this catch block will print this message. Let me run the application. See, in this case, I'm using SSPI, right? Record inserted successfully, right? Once record inserted successfully, you can select the data. right? So one record is inserted in the database or not,
Yes.
right? So now the thing is that how to retrieve the data, right? How to retrieve. So we have performed how to create the table and how to insert a record. Now let us see how to retrieve the data. So select star from student. You know what this query about? You know this query.
Yes.
So it will return all the records that are present inside the student table, right? So I'm preparing the connection string. I'm preparing the SQL command. I'm making establish with the database. I'm executing the SQL command, right? And in this case, it is going to return one SQL data reader, right? So let me show you one thing. Con.close, right? So in this case, what will happen? Can anybody tell me? Okay, let me run the application first. Right? Why it is throwing me some error?
So this is
You
comes
have
in
to
data
make it,
provider. So like connection, we lost the connection. That's why.
Exactly. So from the beginning, I have told you, apart from data set, right? All other things, right? If you want to perform, then those should require one active and open connection. So in this case, once the connection is closed, right, then you cannot access the data from data reader. If this is a data set, then you can access, right? But this is not a data set, it's a data reader. A data reader means it required an active and open connection. And once you close the connection is closed. The connection is not active. And if the connection is not active, then you cannot access the data, right? So connection, data reader, and data adapter, right? All these things require an active and open connection, right? Let me remove this one, right? So now, if I run the application, right, then it will display the data as expected, right? We have having only one record, and that record is displayed in the console, right? So we'll discuss what is data adapter, data reader, what are the different methods. Everything we are going to discuss in detail, but now I'm just showing you what are the things you can do with this ADO.NET, right? So now, if you want to delete the data, then also it is possible. And for that, you need to use what operation? You need to use what DML statement? You need to use delete DML statement, right? Delete from student where ID equals to this, right? This is the statement that you need to execute. So in this case, I think this is also going to work. No need to give this single quote here, right? So record deleted successfully, right? So currently your database having some data, right? Now let me run the application. Record deleted successfully, right? Now check the database, the data is deleted. Clear?
Yes.
Right? So now we have understand how we can perform the different operation on the database using ADO.NET, right? Now let us proceed further and try to understand each of these classes in detail, right? Let us start with the connection class, right? We have used something called SqlConnection. Let me keep focused on that part first, right? SqlConnection. Right. So so if you want to understand .NET data provider, right, you have to understand these 5 things, right? You have to understand what is connection, command, data reader, data adapter, and set. And out of these four required we're going to work on connection oriented architecture, and this is going to be work in disconnected architecture, right? So we have to understand this thing, what is connection in the sense SQL connection, Oracle connection, right? All these things we will understand, right? So what is ADO.NET SQL connection class? The ADO.NET SQL connection class belongs to which namespace? System.SQL client namespace. Right, and this connection object is used to establish an open connection to SQL Server database, right? Using this connection class instance, you can create an open connection with the SQL Server database only. Using this, you cannot communicate with the Oracle, you cannot communicate with the MySQL or other databases. This SQL connection class means it is specifically designed to make the open the or connect to the SQL Server database only. The most important point that you need to remember is the connection does not close implicitly even it is goes out of scope. Therefore, it is always recommended and always good programming practice to close the connection object explicitly by calling the close method, right? In this case, you can see I'm opening the connection, right? This connection is not going to be closed automatically. I have to close this connection by calling the close method. And guys, one more point that you need to remember, the connection should be opened as late as possible and should be closed as early as possible, as the connection is one of the most expensive resources. So in this case, I am opening this connection. Even I can also open the connection here also. Directly, I can also open the connection here. That is also possible. But in this case, this connection is a, what I can say, open here. At this time, the connection is not required, right? But while I'm executing the query, before that, we need to open the connection, right? So what it means the connection object should be opened as late as possible and should be closed as early as possible, right? So in this case, you can see I have written the code in try block and I have closed the connection here, right? Because this will make sure, right? Here I have written this if, right? So you have to write like this. If connection is not null, then close the connection, right? So as late as possible, you have to open the connection, and as early as possible, you have to close the connection, because connection object is an expensive operation, right? If you go to the definition of a SQL connection class, then you will see that it is a sealed class. It implement DB connection and iClonable. So means you can create a clone of this connection object, right? Connection class. DB connection means, well, if you want to communicate with the database connection, right, then you have to use your class would inherit it from DB. So these are predefined classes, right? And this is also a predefined class. This class is a sealed class. Sealed class means you cannot inherit this class, right? And this SQL connection class provides some method. We have discussed this open method. We have discussed this closed method, right? Going further, we are going to discuss the rest all methods, right? Once we start discussing how you can implement a transaction, right? So you know transaction in SQL Server, but how you can implement the transaction in data in ADO.NET, right? Those are also we are going to discuss. But for now, we have only discussed two things. One is close method, another one is open method, right? So get the schema. Schema means what is the schema of your database, right? Schema in the sense, in this case, you can see the schema, what I'm using is a DBO, right? If you want to get those information, then you have to write this get schema. And if you want to create a command, then you can use this command object, and close, we have already discussed to close the connection. And while we are going to discuss transaction, right? The transaction means if you want to execute a group of SQL command, right? Group of a command, either all the commands should execute successfully, and if there is issue in one of the command, then the transaction we need to make fail, right? And for that purpose, we need to use begin transaction, and I will show you everything in practical, right? So how to create the connection object in C#, right? So basically there are two ways to create the connection object in C#. One of the ways I have shown you here in the connection to the constructor of the SQL connection class, you have to provide the connection string. The connection string is nothing but a string consists of a key value pair, right? A string consists of a key value pair where the data source is a key, and dot here I'm specifying is a value. Instead of a dot, you can specify the IP address of the machine or the machine name itself directly. Database, on which database you want to communicate, and the integrated security SSPI means if you are using Windows authentication, you have to provide this. If you are going with the SQL authentication, then you have to provide user ID and a password. Another option is that parameter less constructor you can also use. So in this case, you can see I'm simply creating the connection object, right? Once I'm creating the connection object, this connection class having one property called connection string, and to this connection string property, I have to specify the connection string, right? So in this case, while I'm using this approach, whatever the parameter we are passing to this constructor, that parameter will set with this connection string properties. And even if you are not passing while creating the object, later you can pass that connection string by using the connection string property like this, right? The connection string parameter is a string made of a key value pair, right, having the information required to create a database object, right? So you can see, right, if you are going with a Windows authentication, then you have to use integrated security equals to SSPI or true, right? And if you are going with SQL Server authentication, then you have to use user ID and a password like this. And in that case, this integrated security is not required, right? Data source is the name of the IP address of the SQL Server that you want to connect to. If you are working with the local instance of a SQL Server, then you can put dot. If the server is on a network, then you can use either the name or IP address of the server, right? So you can use the IP address of the server, name of the server, or and if you are running the SQL Server on your local machine, and if you are having only a single instance, right, then in that case you can also use the dot operator, right? And SqlConnection example we have seen, right? So you can do in two ways. Directly you can pass this connection string to this class constructor, right? Or you can also create the connection string as a separate variable. You can pass that separate variable, right, to this SqlConnection class. And here I'm creating this connection object using the using block, and I'm opening and closing block. What is the advantages of using block is that, right, if I'm not using the using block, then I have to call this close method explicitly, right? If I'm not using the using block, then I have to call this close method explicitly. But if I'm using the using block, while and as part of using block, if I'm creating this connection object, right, when the close callbraces is come, right, automatically it will close the connection by calling the close method, right? This automatically thing is only happening if you are using the using block, right? If you are not using the using block, then you have to call the close method explicitly like this, right? Okay, let us see one example. So the database name is student.db. Well, while creating the database, I generally prefer to suffix the word db, right? So you can see I'm creating the connection string here. I'm passing that connection string here, and I'm using this one, right? Automatically, the connection string is going to be closed here, right? It will automatically call the close method. No need to call explicitly the close method. So what is the using keyword? First of all, it is going to import the namespaces. Second thing is that it is going to use while creating some resources, right? Using the using block, and this using block is going to automatically release the resources, right? So this is another use case of a using block, right? So in this case, if the connection is established, then it will give you this message: the connection established successfully, right? Let me run this application. Connection established successfully, right? Now, another thing what I can use instead of a true, I can also use SSPI, right? Now let me run the application. Let's see whether we are getting any exception or not. No, we are not getting any exception. So connection established successfully. Instead of doing this, right, directly you can also pass this as a parameter to this, right? This is also possible. Now, if this variable is not using, so let me comment, right? Now you can run the application. So connection established successfully. Understand what are the different ways to create the connection?
Yes.
Right. Now, what if you do not use the using block? We have already discussed. If I'm not using the using block, right, then what I need to do? I need to suppose, right? Suppose I'm not using the using block, then I have to call the close method explicitly, right? I have to call the close method explicitly. So in this case, you can see I'm not using the using block while creating the connection object. So I'm calling this open method. So I have to close this close method explicitly, right? This is the point of it. What if we do not use the use block? Then you have to explicitly call this a close method to close the connection object, right? So that is fine. So here, what is the problem? So the problem is we have hard-coded the connection string. If we have hard-coded the connection string in our application, then what is the problem? So basically, we will face three problems. What are the problems? Right? Let's say you move your database to a different server, right? Then you need to change the connection, right? Currently, it is pointing to one database, and you want to move this database to a different server. Then what? Then again, you need to change this thing on your application code. Any changes in the application code means what is the problem? Rebuild and redeployment, right? So, right, suppose you deploy this application code, right? And once you do any changes to the application code means what? Again, you need to rebuild the application. Again, you need to redeployment the application, right? If you move your database to a different server, then you need to change the database details in the application code itself. Once you change the application code, then you need to rebuild the application, as well as it also required a redeployment, which is a time consuming. Understand this first problem?
Yes.
Right? See, if I'm using this hard-coded means if I want to change the connection string, then I have to do the changes in my application code. Changes in application code means again you have to redeployment. Again, you have to rebuild the application code. Again, if you have hard-coded the connection string in multiple places, then you need to change the connection in all places, which not only a maintenance overhead, but it is also error, right? So it is not only that from my application, I'm going to establish the connection with the database at one place, right? It might be possible that from your application, right? Many methods are there. From there, you are communicating with the database. That means wherever you use this connection string, in all the places you need to do the changes or not. If you are using this connection string in 100 places, then you need to do the changes in 100 places. Changing the changes making in 100 places is a time-consuming process. It is also error-prone. Suppose few places you forget to update the connection string, then it's an error, right? So the second problem is this one. And third problem is that, say, in real-time application, while developing, you may point to your development database, right? Suppose, see, while we are working with real-time application, we are different server. One is a development server, right? Where we are working. Another is a QA server. Once you deploy this to QA environment for the testing, another one is UAT, right? Another one is production. And in each environment, we are having a different database, right? So a different database means we need to change or we need to update the connection string based on our database, right? So it's going to be difficult. Suppose you are, it might be possible that a development database pointing and you deploy that on UAT. QA database is there, you point that to UAT. UAT connection string you updated and you are working on that database, right? So there should not be this case, right? So what is the best solution, right? These are the problem. Then how to solve this problem? Now to solve this problem, we need the connection string in a centralized place. We do not want to write the connection string again and again. And we need to provide the connection string in such a way that we do not require redeployment and rebuild, right? And if I want, I can change the connection string at one place and that will be applicable to that environment, right? I'm working with the QA, I can provide the QA connection string that place. I'm working with the UAT, I have to provide a UAT connection string in that place. I'm deploying the code to production, right? For production, I have to provide the connection string of a production environment. And this is possible by using some configuration file. And there are two configuration files. One is app config, another one is web config, right? If you are working with some desktop applications, right, then you will find this app config file. And if you are working with some web applications, then you will find this web config, right? For example, if you are developing one Windows application, Windows Form application, console application, right? Then at that time, you will see this app config. For example, you are developing some ASP.NET Web Form application, MVC application, Web API application, WCF application, right? Then in that case, you will find this web config. And this is the central place where you can put the connection string, and from where you will get the connection string information, right? Then how to store the connection string, right? Suppose in my application, if you go to the Solution Explorer, right, then you will find there is a configuration file called app.config, right? In app.config, under the configuration section, you need to provide the connection string, right? How? Now by using the connection string attribute, right? So connection string element. So this is my connection string. You have to use a connection string element, and using this connection string element, right? What you need to do, you need to provide the connection string, right? It is not only key you can provide one connection string. If your application communicating with two databases, right, you can also provide different connection string, right? It is not always mandatory that your application communicating with one database. Might be possible that other databases is there, two databases your application communicating. You can provide two connection string also here, right? But the important thing is that this connection string, while you are creating, you have to provide three things. One is, what is the name of the connection string, what exactly the connection string, and what provider you are going to use, right? Because the provider is the one which is going to decide how to communicate with the respective database, right? If you are using Oracle provider and you are trying to communicate with the SQL Server database, this is not going to work. SQL Server database means SQL Server provider should be there, right? Suppose I'm using this Oracle connection string Oracle, then SQL client, instead of SQL client, what connection, what should be the provider? Oracle client, right? Let me, this is connection string for SQL Server, right? And this is the connection string for Oracle, right? So in this case, let me put this student DB as my database, and right. So I'm not going to use this one. I'm just showing you because I'm not going to use Oracle database at this moment, right? I'm going to use SQL Server connection string. So this is the connection string I'm going to use. Let me give this as a connection string, right? But guys, this name you can give anything, right? This name you can give anything and it is going to work, right? It is not mandatory. Name can be anything. This connection string should be the proper connection string, right? Where you have to mention the IP address or machine name, you have to specify the database and what authentication you have to use. And this is also mandatory, what provider you are going to use, right? So I'm going to use SQL.Data.SQL client provider, right? So this is the centralized place where you need to put the connection string, right? Once you put the connection string, then how you will read the data, right? So there is a class called the configuration manager, right? So this is nothing but your configuration, right? To manage the configuration, right? We are going to use the configuration manager class, right? So there is a class called configuration manager, and this configuration manager class available in System.Configuration.dll, right? And by default, this DLL is not included in your application, right? If you go to the reference folder, you will see that there is no System.Configuration DLL is there. System.Data is there. So that's why I'm using this SQL client, System.Data.SQL client namespace I can use because System.Data is by default added inside this reference folder. But if you look this configuration manager, how to use that configuration manager, I will show you. But I'm going, if I want to use this configuration manager, then first of all, I need to include this System.Configuration DLL, right? As it's a system DLL. So what you can do is, so this DLL is already available. So whenever I'm saying some system means what, this is already available as part of your VCL. You just need to include that DLL in your application. If that is not available as part of VCL, then you can go to NuGet Package Manager and you can add that. But as you can see, the name is started with the system, right? System means what? Now, whenever any DLL start with the system, right? That means it is as part of your base class library, and whenever you install the .NET framework, by default that DLL installed into your application. Some of the required DLL by default, whenever you create an application, they include other thing you can include explicitly, right? Now I want to include that system.configuration. How? So it's a system DLL. No, to include this DLL, right? NuGet package manager is not required, right? Why? Because this is already available in my machine. I just need to add that reference, right? How? Now click on the add button, right? So you can see here I'm having some option, right? Project, right? Com, right? Browse, assembly. So just select the assembly and go down, and somewhere you will see system.configuration. Is that visible to you guys? System.configuration DLL.
Yes.
See, whatever the DLL you have included, those are here selected with the checkbox, right? And I want to see system.core, system.data, system.data.extension. You can find system core data, system.data.extension, system DLL, right? Those are available, but by default, this was not available. So I'm going to include this. So click on the system.configuration, click on the OK button, right? Once you click, then you can see system.configuration, right? So whenever you are seeing the system, means this is a system DLL which is already available as part of your BCL, right? And if any DLL, right, which is not started with system, right? For example, I want to install Newtonsoft.json, right? This is not a system DLL, right? So Newtonsoft.json, what is the DLL? Newtonsoft.json.bson, right? So this is not started with the system. That means this is not available as part of your BCL. And if you want to install this, then you have to install it from your NuGet package manager. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So this is the point that you need to remember when I need to go for when I need to include from my assemblies. I'm gonna, guys, give me 1 minute. Right. So once you include this, now you can access this configuration manager class, right? And using this configuration manager class, you can read the configuration from your configuration file. So in our example, the configuration file is nothing but your app config, right? So you can see, first of all, you need to include the configuration, system.configuration. Then you can use this configuration manager class, right? If you go to the definition of this class, right, then you will see that provide access to configuration files for client application. This class cannot be inherited, right? So in our application, right, this is my configuration file, and this class provide access to this configuration file, right? So how I can access? Now from this configuration manager, so there is a property called a connection string, right? Go to definition. So this is a connection string property. Gets the configuration string section, right? So in this case, this is the configuration. Inside a configuration, what is the section? Connection string. So right. So you can see from this configuration manager, from this connection string section, as in this connection string section, you can have a multiple connection string, right? Which connection string you want to access, right? I want to access connection string. What is the name? This is the name. So if you want, you can provide any name, SQL Server, right? I want to access the SQL Server connection, right? So that name you have to provide this. And once you provide, then you need to convert that to a string variable by calling the toString method, right? So once the connection string, now you will get the connection string. Any question from this statement? By using this configuration manager class, we can access the configuration file. This is my configuration file. And from this configuration file, there is a section called the connection string. You can see this is the section connection string, right? And from this connection string section, there might be multiple connection string. Which connection string you want to access? I want to access the connection string of this one, connection string SQL Server. you have to provide that name here. Right? You just need to provide that name, and then I want to store that the value inside a string variable. So I'm providing this one. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? So once you got the connection string, right, then what you need to do? You just need to use the connection string, right? So you do not need to hard code the connection string anymore. So I just pass the connection string as a parameter to this class, or other option is also there. What is the other option? Connection string equals to const string. And if you do not want to pass, yeah, this is also possible. Now you can open the connection, run the code, and you will get the output as expected. Right? So with this, what is the advantages? The advantages is that your connection string is centralized. Now you want to, if you want to change the database name, right, or IP address, you simply need to change here, right? And if you are doing any changes in the configuration file, redeployment, rebuild is not required, right? And again, for QA, you can change the database or server to QA environment. For UAT, you need to change this to UAT environment. For production, you have to change this to production environment, right? And the connection string is not hard coded on your application, right? Wherever you use, you have to use this syntax, right? And this syntax is not going to be changed, right? What is changed? The application configuration file is going to be changed. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Any question from anyone?
No.
Right. Okay. So the next thing that what we are going to discuss is SQL command. Right. So I'm going to discuss each of these classes in detail. Right. From the beginning, I have shown you the use of a SQL command class. SQL command class is basically used to prepare the command, right, and to execute the command, right? So we understand SQL connection class. Now it's time to understand the SQL command, right? Why this SQL command? The ADO.NET SQL command class is used to store and execute the SQL statement in SQL Server database, right? If this class is Oracle command, then it is used to create, store, and execute the SQL statement in the Oracle database. SQL command means it is going to execute the SQL statement in the SQL Server database, right? So you can see this SQL command is inherited from DB command and iClonable interface. And again, it's a sealed class. As it's a sealed class, you cannot inherit this class, right? And guys, you can see there are many different constructors. Unlike SQL connection, where two constructors, one is zero argument, another one is string connection string. So here you have 5 different constructors. One is SQL command doesn't take any parameter, right? Then your second is one SQL command where you can pass the command text parameter. In this case, there is a property called command text. Using that command text property, you can set the command text, right? There is a connection string property where you can set the connection string, right? If you want, you can use this version where you only need to pass the command text. If you want, you can pass the command text and SQL connection. If you want, you can pass the command text, SQL connection, and SQL transaction, right? And if you want command text, SQL connection, transaction, and encryption settings, right? So this transaction and encryption settings later we will discuss, because once we do not understand the transactions, right, then you cannot understand this encryption settings, right? So once we start discussing the SQL transaction, then at that time I will explain you this thing. But now I can keep focus on these 3 things, right? So what is my requirement? I'm going to create a database, and inside that database, I'm going to enter some data, right? For that purpose, I have already written the code, right? Let me delete this statement. Delete this table, right? Once you delete this table, right? So student DB database is already created. So this is use the student DB database, create the student table with ID name, email, and mobile number, and insert some data, right? Let me insert this column could not find storage procedure student. What is the issue? Okay. Okay. So now if you refresh this to tables folder, right, then you will see student table, right? And if you want to select the data, you can see this student table having some data, right? Now the database part is over, right? So I have created the database and I have select the insert some data, right? And this SQL command class basically provide three important methods. The SQL command class provides three important methods, and it is one of the frequently asked interview question. What is the difference between execute reader, execute non-query, and execute scalar? Can anybody tell me? Any have experience? Anybody having?
Yeah, reader reads registers. Non-query is just to execute one command over the database, and Scalar returns one value.
Exactly. See, if you want to perform any kind of update, delete, insert statement, right? And if you want to know how many rows are affected by that DML statement, right? In that case, you have to use execute non-query. So DML basically, what are the statement comes under DML? Can anybody tell me?
CRUD operations.
Not CRUD operations. DML will basically insert, update, and delete. Select is not a DML operation. Select is part of your DRL operation, data retrieval operation. So DML means what? Data manipulation operation. Data manipulation operation means it is going to manipulate the data in the database. If you are using a select operation, then that select is not manipulating the data. It is just retrieving the data. Select is not a part of your DML. DML means insert, update, and delete, right? So if you want to perform insert, update, and delete operation on the database, and if you want to know how many rows are affected, like if I'm performing one insert operation, how many records are inserted? If I'm performing one update operation, how many records are updated by that update operation or by that update query? If I'm using some delete query, right, then how many records are deleted? That count, if you want to know, right, then in that case, you need to use execute non-query. From your application, right, from your database, you want to return a single value. Total number of records in the database table, total number of employees who are having salary greater than 1 lakh per month, right? If you want to return a scalar value like this, right, then you want to use execute scalar. For example, what is the minimum salary? What is the maximum salary? What is the average salary? Right? One scalar. Scalar means a single value. If you are returning a single value from your database, right, by executing some query, then in that case, you have to use execute scalar method. And execute reader, basically, if you want to return records, if you want to return records, that might be a single record, that might be a n number of records, right? Records means a table of data, right? Then in that case, you have to use execute reader. Clear, guys? What is the use of an execute reader? Execute non-query, execute scalar. Execute scalar means single value. Execute reader means multiple values, or you can say rows of data. Execute non-query means if you are going to perform insert, update, and delete operations. Clear?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let me show you the example, 3 examples, so that you will understand these things, right? First of all, I'm going to show you the use of execute reader. So you can see, okay, let me increase. So this is my database, student.db pointing to student.db. Instead of using this, what I can do is I have already stored the connection string, right? So what is the class name? Configuration manager, right? So for that, what namespace you need to use? System.configuration, right? So configuration manager dot, what is the section name? Connection string. And what is the connection string name? This is my connection string name. This connection string is a user defined name. You can give any name. Then you have to call the toString method, right? My connection string is ready, right? So you can hard code the connection string, or even you can use this connection string, right? Let me put it here so that I can reuse this thing. Right now, I'm selecting all the records, right? I'm selecting all the records from the database. And in this case, you can see it is not only returning a scalar value, it is going to return multiple column data, right? All the column data and multiple rows, right? So that means it is going to return more values, right? Multiple records. So in that case, I have to use which method?
Yes.
Right? So we are having three methods, right? So
Execute reader.
right? If I'm going to return multiple records from the database, then which method I need to use?
Execute reader.
Execute reader, right? So in that case, you can see I'm opening the connection and I'm using the execute reader method. Clear? And this execute reader method will return the collection of records, and that is going to store inside this SQL data reader. Right, so this is a class, right? And you can see this class provides a way of reading a forward only stream of rows from a SQL Server database. This class cannot be inherited, right? So you can see what is exactly he is providing. He is providing a way of reading the stream of rows from the SQL Server database in forward only. That means once it reads the first record, it will read the second record, it will read the third record. But it is not possible that from record 3, it will read record 2, it will read record 1. That means only forward, only direction, right? But if you are using data set, in that case, you can have in both forward only and backward only, right? So, but in this case, it is only having a forward only stream. Stream means from the stream means you can say it is a link between your code and the database table from where it is reading the data one by one, right? So basically, if you want to read the data from the SQL Server database in a forward only manner, then you have to use SQL Data Reader, right? So here I'm using SQL Data Reader means it will read the data from the corresponding database table, and it will read the data in a forward only manner. And how it is going to read the data one by one? Now by using the read method, right? So on this SDR, right, SQL Data Reader instance, I'm calling this read method. This read method will read the data one by, read method will read the record one by one, right, from the stream and in a forward only direction. And this read method, what he will do, it will return true, right? If there is some record. If there is no record, then this method is going to return false, right? Let me go to the definition, right? So return type is true, right? So true if there are more rows, otherwise false, right? So basically, if there are more rows in the data reader, then it will return true, else it will return false, right? And here you can see once it return true, right, that data you can read. And again, once you call this method, again, if there is record, then it will return true, and then you can read the data like, right? Once all the records are completed, right? Once all the records are read, then this method is going to return false, right? And how you can access? By using the index, right? So by using the index as a key, you can access the data, right? From this, what are the column name? Column name is ID name, email, and mobile. So you can directly use the same name, right? Name property, email property, and a mobile property while accessing the data. So STR means this is the object. By using string indexer or right, so I can specify the column name, and this will return me the data, right? This will return me the email ID, this will return me the mobile number. Now let me run the application. Right, you are getting the data as expected or not, guys?
Yes.
Right. So basically, whenever you want to return rows of records, right, multiple data, right, not a single scalar value, then in that case, you need to use execute reader. It might be written a single record, it might be written a multiple records, right, but more than one column data, right? So execute reader. Now we'll understand the use of the other method, that is, see, in this case, what will happen? Command object means this is the command text, right? And this is the connection string we have discussed. this text is going to be executed on this connection, right? And to access the element, we are using SQL data reader. Clear, guys? This is nothing but my command text, and this is nothing but my connection object. This text is going to be executed on this connection object, right? When we call this execute reader method. And once we call this execute reader method, if the SQL syntax is fine, if the connection is established, right, then it will return a stream of a reader, and you can retrieve that stream by using SQL data reader. And this SQL data reader having this read method, which is forward only. So once you call this method, if there is some record in the stream, right, it will return true. And once it return true, then you can access the data by using the intention. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. Now, right. So in this case, you can see I'm specifying the things are direct, right? Now what I'm trying to do, cm dot command text, ca dot command text. So I don't want to pass this here, so I can pass the command text here, right? Right now what I can do is cm dot, there is a property called connection string. Where is that? Connection, right? So here I can pass the connection string also, right? This is my connection object that I can pass here. This is my command text that I can pass here, right? So now if you run this application, right, then also it is going to work, right? So you can directly specify in the connection constructor, and you can specify by separately like this, right? And here it is also giving me some intelligence, right? You can initialize how? By using object initializer, right? So you can also specify like this, right? This is also going to work. So different options are there. Whichever you like, you can use that option. From the performance point of view, all are going to be same, right? So we have discussed the execute reader method. Now I want to return a single value. I want to return the total number of rows, right, that are available in the student table. Then for that purpose, what method I need to use? Can anybody tell me?
Execute scalar.
Execute scalar. Scalar means a single value, right? And if I want to return a single value, then I have to use execute scalar method, right? So in this case, you can see everything is same, right? Connection object is created using, so the connection object is automatically closed here, right? So it is opening, and here automatically it is going to be closed, right? Select count ID from student, right? So basically from this student table, the total number of records are there. That count I want to return, right? So that is going to return. And if you are thinking whether this query is fine or not, right, that you can also check. Sorry. So count means 4, a single value it return. And as it return a single value, I have to use execute scalar. But if you go to the definition of this execute scalar, then you will see that the return type is object. As the return type is object, right? So if you want, so why the return type is object? Because sometimes it return a single integer value, sometimes it return a single string value, sometimes it return a boolean value, sometimes it return a floating point value, right? So as this, as from our SQL query, we can return different type of data, different type of value. To store all the different types of value, they make this method return type of object. Now, if you want, then you can convert that to specific type. Yes, I know this method is going to return me one integer value, so I can convert that to integer by typecasting, right? So I can store this, and now this method is once I execute this code, it is going to return me the count property as well, right? Now, if you are wondering what exactly the SQL statement that execute on my database, right? So you can check, right? So how you can check? There is something called SQL profiler, right? Open the SQL profiler, right? Give any name, right? I'm providing SQL text. I'm clicking this one, right? Now I'm going to run this code, right? So once I run this application, right, now go to the SQL profiler, and you can see one statement is executed, right? So what is the statement? Select ID count from student. This statement is executed on the database, and this is the starting and this is the completed. Which statement is started, which statement is completed? The select count ID from student. That means whenever you are executing some query in the query, and if some exception is occurring, right, some data is not properly getting, right, you are not getting the data, then you can take help of this SQL profiler, and you can verify what exactly the SQL statement executed on the database, and accordingly you can verify whether the code or whether the statement whatever written is perfect or not, right? So this is one of the very useful tool which is provided by SQL Server, right? So you should know what is this SQL profile, right? So in this case, as we are returning a single scalar value, I have to use execute scalar method. Now I want to perform insert, update, and delete operation on the database. So for that purpose, what method I have to use? I have to use execute non-query, right? So you can see this is one command object I have created. So this command is basically used for inserting some data, right? Then I have opened the connection. I have called this a execute query method. This method is going to return me the number of rows affected. So in this case, how many rows are inserted? That count it is going to return. In this case, we have written a single insert statement. So it is going to return me 1, right? So then what I'm trying to do, so as we know, this is the part, it's nothing but your command text. Right now, I'm going to use the same command object for update operation. So we already know there is a property called command text, and using that property, I can write my update statement, right? And here I'm writing one update statement, and then I'm executing, calling this execute non-query method. So in this case, this execute query will return the number of statement, number of records affected by this SQL query. So in this case, one record is going to be affected whose ID is 105. So it is going to return me 1, right? So again, suppose you want to delete some record from the database, you can use delete query, right? I want to delete the student whose ID is 105. So I have written this delete query and providing that delete query to this command text parameter, and then I'm executing this query, right? So by calling this execute non-query method. So this again going to return me the number of rows affected by this delete statement, right? So if anything wrong, right, then this statement is going to be executed, right? Let me run the application. Right, insert rows 1, updated rows 1, deleted rows 1. So currently 4 rows are there. Now let me run the application. Right, so which one is deleted, guys?
The one we inserted.
No, which one is deleted? 105, which we have inserted, that one deleted, right? See, initially we have inserted 105, right? That record is there. No, why? Because we have deleted that record now. We have deleted that record, right? Now, if you want to see these things again, right? So let me copy this thing. So first 105 will be inserted, right? And then that 105 will be updated. See, first inserted with the name value Ramesh, and then that value is changed to Ramesh changed, right? Now, again, if you execute this statement, that is going to be deleted, right? So clear, guys?
Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
one doubt, just one note. Like, if we want to use a single output, then can't we use this the other one which we use for multiple records? What is that?
Execute reader.
Yeah, for single value, can't we use that?
You can use, but it is not. You can use, no issue. Even you can use execute reader, right? So in this case, instead of calling execute non-query, you can still use that. Instead of using execute non-query, you can also write execute reader, no issue, right? Suppose
For
yes,
DML also
I can use execute reader, right? But in this case, it is not going to return me these things, right? You cannot store that. So simply you can call this method by right. And in this case, right, in this case, it is not going to return me the number of rows affected, right? So in this case, you can also call this execute non, instead of execute non-query, you can call this execute reader. But the execute reader is only going to return whatever the select statement is returning. Is there any select statement in this statement?
No.
That means it is not going to return anything, right? So no issue, you can use execute reader here, right? But see, whatever the statement you are sending, that you can send using execute reader, execute non-query, and execute scalar, no issue. But the thing will come into the picture, what is the return type? If you are using execute reader, then whatever the select query returning, that will be stored, right? But if you are using execute scalar, and if you are returning multiple values, then first value will be stored, right? And again, you will not get, if you are using execute reader, right? In this case, the number of statement affected, you will not capture. You will not show you how many numbers of records are affected, right? So basically, why they are providing 3 methods? See, using one method only, I can do all the operations, but I cannot handle the output, right? So output in the sense, if it is not a select query, right, then you cannot use, if it is not a select query, and if you are using this execute reader, then it is not going to return anything. Then how I will be able to know how many statements are updated?
Yes. Okay. Depending on the output, we need to use accordingly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So 3 methods means each method having some specific purpose. Right. Any question? Any else? Any question from anyone else?
No.
Okay. That's it for today. Again, we'll continue our ADO.NET discussion. We'll try to complete ADO.NET in this weekend only. We'll discuss what are transactions, right? We'll discuss how to execute storage procedure, right? Everything we are going to discuss in detail. We'll discuss what is data set, how to work with the disconnected architecture. Everything we are going to cover as part of this. Okay, fine, guys. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Very good night. Day.
See you.
It's
Bye-bye.
good morning,
Yeah.
guys. It's good morning. For you, good night. For us, it's good morning. Okay, fine.
Yeah, good.
Good morning, good night. Thank you.
Okay, okay.